Josh Allen looking deep, going deep.
To me, talking about the Bills, what else would you rather be doing?
We're hoping to add a new dimension to the Cover One network.
Slings it deep downfield, and it's caught inside the 20.
Right now, I just want to talk about this championship level. I've never had a championship caliber team to talk about.
I want to focus more on the storylines each week. What are the big stories going on with the Bills? What are thoughts, commentary? How do these things impact Buffalo?
Deep drop. Deep throw. And it is pulled in for the touchdown.
Allen deep to the end zone and caught for a touchdown.
Play action. Allen. Deep downfield. Wide open.
Welcome into a new edition of the Going Deep podcast. Another Buffalo Victory Tuesday for us here. Actually, would be Victory Sundays, but we're coming live to you on a Tuesday. Kind of break down a lot of different things that have been going on over the past week, Mike, since we last met and discussed this crazy season that we're hoping to have. Mike, how are you doing today, first and foremost?
I'm doing great today. A lot of Bills stuff to talk about. I have a vacation 1 week from today, so countdown to vacation is starting right now, so I'm in a great mood.
Mike, you have vacation all the time. You take mini trips all the time. I swear.
That's what I do.
You're always like Cleveland. You're in Ohio. You're
everywhere. Yeah.
You're in Fort Wayne.
All year.
Yeah, man. Mike's got the mini vacations going on, but many vacations or not, we have a lot to talk about on the front of what the Buffalo Bills were just able to do in the preseason game 2, in the game of the dress rehearsal of one series for the Buffalo offense. A little longer for some of the other starters, but it was a really kind of eye-opening game to see how deep the roster is and how prepared they were. That was really what was kind of jumped right out to me as the jump that they were able to make with the first team offense, the first team offensive line, the first team defense missing some players. So it was really a really good experience to see like what this team's able to do. And they did what they needed to do in terms of beating up on the Colts, on the backups of the Broncos. I mean, they have guys still out there looking to make teams. There's still plenty of talented players on the Broncos, but they just did not look like they wanted to be there, Mike.
Yeah, Denver looked like they wanted absolutely nothing to do with the Bills on Saturday afternoon. And you know what? Nate Hackett has kind of come out and said the whole point is trying to stay healthy for the start of the regular season. So that mindset obviously impacted his players because they did not show up at all on Saturday afternoon. And I don't care that it was against backups. There was no fight among the backups either. So when you get thoroughly killed that badly, even when the Bills starters were out of the game, they just wanted nothing to do with the Bills. And good for Buffalo to come out and just take advantage of them and play their best football.
Yeah, that's to be true. That's to be said. And if you kind of look down at some things that were really interesting to me, and we had cuts as well. Cuts came in, rolled in, just another 5 that were due today. So some interesting, maybe a little bit interesting, a little bit of normal there on top of a Cody Ford trade, Mike. So we had some good news and nuggets. And then Brandon Beane spoke for 17 minutes today as well. I don't know if that was we didn't know if that was around Cody Ford trade, if that was kind of like a 2022 wrap up, preseason wrap up. What exactly that press conference was. The Bills labored at 2022 preseason press conference. So I don't know that was always like connected, but lots of questions around Cody Ford and his development. Brandon Beane came out and said it was his best preseason to date. He looked really good. One of the best looking players on Saturday is what he said, even post trade, which was interesting. The Bills did seem that they were able to uptick his value a little bit. This is what teams dream of, Mike, to be able to take a guy that was on the chopping block, get him to 7th round range, get him to 6th round range, get him to 5th round range. That's the kind of thing that you dream of in the preseason. And that does hold some value because if you're able to take some roster bubble guys and let them play well and under a good team and under a good coaching staff to work the value like that, that's how good teams stay good. And quite frankly, a 5th round pick is a pretty good return for a guy that probably was right on the roster today. I think he would have made the roster, but really realistically as an 8th or 9th offensive lineman today. So they did go ahead and trade that in for a 5th round pick, quite literally. But I think what's really important to notice is we got a lot of talk like, is this going to be worse than Teller? I mean, you traded Teller a little bit early on in his career, in my opinion. I think you have a fairly good experience and feeling on who Cody Ford is, right, Mike?
Yeah, Cody Ford, if he turns into a Wyatt Teller, I'll be super shocked if that happens. And you're right with what you said. Getting a 5th-round pick in return for him is a solid get for Brandon Beane and company. You can be disappointed by the player that he turned out to become after being a second rounder, while also being happy with the return that you get for a player that essentially would have been fighting for one of the last spots on the roster and not likely on your team beyond this season. So good return. And you know what, Brandon Beane, a 5th-round pick, it can sometimes turn into something, whether that be a Khalil Shakir, a Matt Milano, or some asset to be used to try to acquire a player that they have some interest in. So it's not a lock that the 5th rounder will turn into anything, but with Brandon Beane, you got better odds than most GMs of actually making that turn into something solid.
Yeah, absolutely. Sophia God's friend. I love the name. Anyways, yeah, I mean, I did see some stuff out. I do follow some Broncos individuals and some media members as well. And there's some heat coming out of there. So the fans don't necessarily agree with Hackett or the players' mindset of this not mattering. They really think there's some deficiencies on that roster, minus their trade for Russell Wilson. They definitely think that there's some major deficiencies on the middle to end of their roster, which is kind of where the Bills started. The early Bills teams under McDermott had some players, but they definitely lacked some depth and some weapons across the team that might not get him there. I think the Broncos are still a little bit better than they showed in terms of the weapons that they do have. I know they're missing Tim Patrick, a guy they really liked. He's out for the year with a preseason injury, but they still have Jerry Jeudy. They still have a lot of other talented players on that offense that will really help Russell Wilson along the way. So we'll see what they're able to do. I still think they're, top 5 in the AFC right now. So to show that you're better, and then I'm not even let's take the first quarter out of it. Let's take the starters when they play. Let's take that out of it because that is a little bit unbalanced. I'm looking at the second to the fourth quarter, and the Bills still dominated with backups on backups. They still dominated. There definitely is some depth issues on that Broncos team, and I do think that could pop up over the course of the season for them. Who, this was supposed to be a big season for them, so we'll see what that meant. I didn't think their offensive line played well at all. Like, you'd want to see more, hopefully when Javonte Williams plays, Melvin Gordon, etc., that might be able to showcase some of their talent. They have Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler. So there are some names there in Denver, but the performance they put on the field on Saturday afternoon was just not one you want to write home about. And I would be honestly really nervous if I was a fan of that team. But you look at the team that they played, and that's the Bills, and what they were able to do is take care of business. Yeah, first, we'll get into some things that we like about that game, but to run down some of the transactional moves that everybody probably all knows about. Just talked about the Cody Ford deal a little bit. The Bills did release a couple of interesting names in Tavon Austin, a guy that at some point we're maybe looking for that last final roster spot. Matt Hawk, a guy that, quite frankly, just, never really had a shot, if we're being honest. Matt Araiza would have had to come out and really struggled for that to be go the other way. Cody Ford traded. And then, big move as well, putting Ike Butker on the PUP list. This is something that we did some research on behind the scenes, that as of the 80-man cut, which was today, anybody that goes on the PUP list will have to sit out at least the first 4 games of the NFL season. And big news out of that is we didn't see Trey White. Brandon Beane comes out today saying we need to buy another week. So that's good news that there is a path to him not going on any of those lists, is what Beane said today. So there is a path for him to not need 4 weeks. And maybe it is only a week or 2 into the season. And I still love my prediction of him being sprinkled in some games. I don't know that you'll see him starting day 1 against the Rams. I do think that there's some world where you see him in certain sub packages, in certain situations, to kind of build up and utilize him that way, Mike. So right off the bat, and then, those were the cuts this week. Did anything jump out to you? What do you think about the PUP with Butker compared to White? Anything that you took away from the moves before the final cut down next week?
Yeah, I want to address a little bit of all the things that you just brought up. First off, Tavon Austin getting cut. He just didn't flash in camp. I know in mini camp, the reporters, Bills beat, were talking about how he looked great. Well, a guy like that always looks great against air. Then you put the pads on. There's a reason why this deep into his NFL career, he just hasn't been an impact player. His way to making the Bills was always going to be as a returner. once Khalil Shakir took over the punt return job and you had Isaiah McKenzie still returning kicks, Tavon Austin really didn't have a chance. Matt Hawk, I think this is more so an opportunity for him to try to land somewhere before the regular season starts. Realistically, the Bills knew that Ariza was going to win this job. He had been outperforming Hawk all through camp. The whole can he hold a field goal narrative, I think, was a little bit exaggerated all offseason. This guy was an athlete. He was playing multiple sports growing up. The thought that he couldn't learn to hold a football properly for field goals, I thought it was borderline laughable. And if you listen to some clips from Matt Ariza speak, he thought it was kind of laughable. He's like, I'm an athlete. I'll figure it out. And as I expected, not an issue at all right there. Ike Butker going to the PUP, expected, as Greg has been saying for much of the offseason following his injury. What I think the biggest news to take away from today is what you just hit on about Trey White. They haven't put him on the PUP list to start the regular season yet. Now, he might end up on that, but the fact that they have not put him on that list yet should be some encouraging news for Bills fans, because it means that the Bills still think it is possible that he could be available before week 5. The only reason why you wouldn't put him on PUP is if you think he could return some point in the first 4 weeks of the season. He might not be able to. It's still premature for any of us to speculate because we don't know how he's doing with his recovery. We don't have access to the Bills doctors. We don't know what they think about where he's at this point. But the fact he was not put on the PUP list today for the start of the regular season means that they still have some outside hope that he could be available during that time frame. And one thing that's important about that too is I don't believe you can practice for those 4 weeks. So if you do go on that regular season PUP list to have an added open roster spot, he's not going to be able to practice till after week 4. Then you get him into practice for a few weeks. You're talking about a return probably not till week 6, 7 at the earliest. So if you put him on that PUP, you're not talking about 4 games. You're probably talking 6 or 7 games. So, and the Bills know that. I think a little bit encouraging, but obviously take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, and PUP has changed with COVID and with, new rules coming in and out, this, different changes to the CBA, et cetera. This was the first year you were able to put this is the first date you were able to put somebody on PUP was today and have that not count against your roster. I haven't heard of a minimum date. So to my knowledge, I do believe you can still put them on as up to roster cuts as long as they are on PUP now. Once they're removed from that list, let's say they removed somebody from that list, they are ineligible officially to go. So, but I think today was the first day that you could put somebody on the list and have it not count against your roster. Up to this point, anybody on it, up to this point, it doesn't really mean anything because you still count against your roster. They can come back at any time. It doesn't really mean anything. Today was the first day it means something. Anybody going on that list is mandated to stay on that list now through the first 4 weeks of the season, and they can't practice, which is a huge news and nugget. To me, I was like, what's the difference? Who really cares? But I do believe some of those semantics of can they practice? How many IR spots do you have? Can you bring back? Some of those things the Bills need to factor in because I think it's like 8 now that you can bring back from injured reserve. So it's actually next Tuesday would be the last day for PUP based on unless something drastically changed, that is the last day for PUP. And the Bills, Brandon Beane even said it today, they have a week to still think about it. And I still think a week's important. If they knew that Trey White and they wanted him on this list, for sure, they would have done it. Because quite frankly, that gives another player another week to make a roster to show you what they can do, keep them in your system. Just like today, they had to make another move so that they could put, Ike Butker on the PUP list. So if they would have rather had that, especially on a deep roster, the Bills probably would have kept a player around. They would let us know today. Today would have been the first day we would have known that Trey White would go on the PUP. But he has up to another week to kind of settle this. So really, it's a week. It's basically like a week long. You have to make that determination from today until next Tuesday.
And Kevin, the part where you can't practice either, I think that plays a role in this too. Because even if you don't think he will be able to play the first couple weeks for sure, you still want him to have some time to hit the practice field before getting into game action. If you put him on the PUP to start the regular season, you're basically conceding he's going to miss additional games beyond that 4. I don't think the Bills are ready to do that yet. And the fact that they're not ready to do that at this point means they have to have some expectation that by mid-September, late September, we're getting closer to that time where even if he's not playing in games, he'll be at least starting to practice, which that's what I take away from the news today, that at this point in time, they're thinking he's at least close to hitting the practice field in the near future.
Yeah, that's right. To me, I think that's true. And the most racks of, and this is not the greatest news for anybody who's hoping for them 54th, 55th, 56th man on the roster. The best move for the Bills is to keep him on the active roster, because from there, they have flexibility on when he plays. They have flexibility on when he practices, what he does, where he does it. All of that is he's an active roster member. What's interesting about why they came up with the inactive list, and people hate the inactive list. Why wouldn't everyone be able to play every week? If you make the 53, why wouldn't you be able to play? That's what making the roster means, for roster balance, for injuries. That's the reason that exists, so that some team doesn't come in with 53 healthy players and the other one's at 46. That's the reason the inactive lists exists. And it's not in the National Football League. I don't see that going away anytime soon, because there's always injuries, and you can't just have people on IR. There's got to be some flex, and really that rosterable players, that's a real protected list. That's your inactive list. That's your protected players list. Practice squad is more or less literally just that. Somebody that practices can be plucked at any time. It's really the 6 inactives each week. It's 6 now because you can have an extra offensive lineman active on game days. That's the list of players that you're protecting from another team. That's really your real first people in the game if you do have an injury for next week. So that's something to always remember, that you have to make 6 inactive on game day anyways. The Bills might think that they have some value in Trey White being an early inactive on the list early on, and having somebody else on the practice squad, like thinking you can get a Tommy Sweeney to the practice squad. That might be the play. And Brandon Beane mentioned it today. Like, we're seeing who we can get through to the practice squad, because even on a talented roster like the Bills, you're going to have only 1 or 2 or 3 at the most get claimed. And so the Bills are going through that. The Bills actually want to reduce the amount of players claimed, not increase it. It's fun for us as fans to be like, wow, the Bills have like 4 players, and they already have the 2 in Watermeyer when you go into New England, and Elijah Griffin playing well in New York. There's a path for some of them to even make the rosters there. So that they should count toward how many the players the Bills had to cut up talent level, because they figured those 2 people would be able to find jobs across the league. But Mike, Trey White could sit on the inactives list early on in the season, and hopefully the Bills would push someone down into the practice squad situation. So I think that that's something that the Bills have to think about on inactives on game days. They have to sit players out anyways.
Yeah.
It might as well be Trey White to have that flexibility.
There's a lot of different ways that they can attack it. If we end up seeing him put on the PUP list a week from now, then we'll know they truly think he won't be ready until midseason. So right. That's big news in the next week that we're going to find out about. How this plays out in the next week is going to be crucial to when we see Trey White back on the field for the Bills. And I understand everyone saying you want him to be 100%, and absolutely the Bills are going to make sure that Trey is fully healthy before he returns to the field. They are not going to rush him back on. But it is important to note the Bills' schedule is front-loaded with the difficult teams on their schedule. We act like 13-4, 14-3 is an inevitability, but it's possible they could come stumbling out the block and go 5-3, 4-4 through these first 8 games. So without having Trey White, potentially, that's just going to make it that much more difficult. I know we've been very high on the Bills' rookie corners, on Christian Benford, Kaiir Elam, even Dane Jackson, who entering his 3rd year. But it's important to note, none of those guys, especially the rookies, they don't even have NFL experience. But Dane Jackson has limited starting experience in the NFL. It is not a guarantee that come regular season action that they are going to look the part of quality NFL starters. We're hoping that's the case, given that they have strong safety support behind them in what looks like it should be a superior defensive line and solid linebacking crew. But if there was one spot that opponents could attack with Trey White out, it's the corners. And don't take it for granted. The Bills know what they have right now, but they definitely would much rather have Trey White out there than not. So big news definitely in the next week.
Yeah, exactly right. Like you do have one extra offensive lineman since COVID that is eligible for the game day actives list that would have been inactive.
I just want to address this. Yeah, the Bills corners did play fine without Trey last year, but they also had Levi Wallace, who had starting experience in the NFL. And you can say whatever you want about Levi Wallace. He was a proven starter in the NFL. You are now going from that to Dane Jackson, who was your third string corner last year. And then you're potentially relying on two rookies beyond that you have no clue what to expect. Obviously, Taron Johnson is a quality top-tier nickel corner. But to say we played fine without Trey last year doesn't really matter at this point in time. It's a completely new season, new squad, and new players in the secondary. Yes, we all trust Sean McDermott and his ability to coach up corners, and it looks like they found some diamonds in potentially Kyer Elam and Christian Benford, but that is far from a guarantee. And when your first game in the NFL is going up against Cooper Kupp and Allen Robinson, you better be ready for the challenge or you're going to be in for a long night. So, yes, I'm confident in these youngsters, but don't assume that a solid performance against the Indianapolis starters when who knows what effort percentage they were even putting in at that time. Don't assume that's just going to be what you see in the regular season.
That's right. I mean, and also, where did it affect him the most? The games that matter the most. Look at against Kansas City. The Bills were unable to get off the field all day. Does Trey White change that narrative? It's possible that if Trey White was active against the Chiefs, it's tough to say that he wouldn't have been the difference in that game. And, it's early on. It's week one. Like, it's not life or death. It really isn't. It's on the road. Are they coming off of a Super Bowl, kind of a lag? Are the Bills flying high after, kind of really thinking about this moment? There's a lot of that goes into this in week one. But to me, you want Trey White ready if healthy. And the Bills are thinking along the same lines. They don't want him, just like they don't want to rush him back. At the same time, if the player's ready and he's ready to work and he seems by all accounts is checked off by the doctors, they'll take him for any extra game they can get him. So I do think that it's possible to need the flexibility. And my way right now, outside of him just fully not being ready for at least 4 weeks, is to keep him on the roster and have him inactive on game days. And then the first time he's even able to do pregame workouts, get in the game at least on a sub role as a backup in emergency situations. I think that's what you're looking for to have is somebody that can be built up and ready to go when he's ready week 2, week 3, week 4.
And Kev, there's only one way to truly know when he's ready, and that's by putting him out on the field and testing him. Unfortunately, you can do every test you want in the world on an ACL. Eventually, you're going to have to take that leap, go out on a field and test it out. And sometimes bad things happen when you do that, but with injuries, you never know you're fully recovered or you're mentally ready to go back on the field until you just do it. And that's the tough thing. It's easy to say, oh, give him an extra couple weeks, give him an extra month. We won't know if that's going to make a difference or not. Only Trey will know when he's truly at that point where he's comfortable to go back on the field and play.
Right. And it's always, you have to protect the player from themselves sometimes in terms of him saying, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. I'm feeling good. I'm running. I'm sprinting. I'm working. So at some point there is a checks and balances system that goes in, but he needs him having a lot of time to prepare in the game week practice, even going into the inactive list against the Rams week 1, that's huge. So I do believe that the Bills will think a lot about him being on the active roster, regardless if he plays week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's a lot that are going to go into him being on the active roster. And there's a lot of benefit to it outside of like, how can I do everything I can to keep Tommy Sweeney? I mean, I do think that the Trey White being on the roster might have more impactful meaning than risking Sweeney to the league in a waiver situation. And there's, Sweeney's just an example. Maybe it's Cam Lewis, maybe it's, someone along those lines, but there's a lot that they need to mull over putting him on the active roster. And it could be very possible, Mike.
Yeah. And talking about some of these guys that could potentially get cut and claimed by another team, I like what Aaron Quinn says a lot. If your team cutting the 54th player on your roster, and risking them getting claimed by someone else. If that's the difference from you guys being good or bad, then you're probably a pretty poor football organization to begin with. I'm not really too concerned with any of the players that are right on that edge, that cut line, that if any one of them gets cut and claimed by someone else, that it'll have a truly significant impact on the Bills one way or another. Yes, there's some good guys that I like in this Bills organization that I would like to have as additional depth on their practice squad if injuries and other things were to occur. But there's not one player I'm going to be losing sleep if the Bills cut and they get claimed by another team. And you can go through all of them. You can talk about Raheem Blackshear. You can talk Isaiah Hodgins, Cam Lewis, Balin Spector, on and on and on, Tommy Sweeney. Not only will not all of them get claimed, it's more than likely most of them won't get claimed. But even if those guys did, the Bills will have ample opportunities to claim guys on other teams that are being waived and cut on cut down days. So it's not like the Bills are the only team that have good players that are going to be cut and not make their 53. It's all across the league, and they'll have their opportunities to fill those slots with other players. So we'll be talking about a lot of these cut down decisions, but overall, I'm not losing a ton of sleep over it. It's not going to be the end of the world either way for the Bills.
And what's cool, guys, is next week, this time, cut down show. So we're going to be able to bring you the cut down special right here on the Cover One Podcast Network. We're going to bring you the live news from them because the cut downs are in 1 week from today, Mike. So we're going to be the first action that you see from cut down day. Today, not quite as interesting. Still some news coming out, but next week we're going to be really at you next week. So be here with your thoughts. And a lot of this will be a little bit more clear just in 1 week from now in terms of what are they going to do. They'll know in 1 week from today what we're going to do with Trey White, at least somewhat, at least some form of timetable based on what list he winds up on. I do believe that, like, if he is going on a PUP, that will show that he wouldn't be ready nearly for 5 or 6 weeks. But if he still stays around, that doesn't mean he's going to be around on week 1. That just does mean that you might see him on an inactive list week 1. So there's a lot that we can break down next week. So be here. Make sure you're here next week for the live cut down show from the Going Deep podcast. And just while we're at it, just make sure you give One Pass a shot. One of the best insider programs out there. You get a really cool shirt. You can, learn the game with Eric Turner and a lot of us here at Cover One, a lot of scouting reports and behind the scenes articles. Make sure you give One Pass a shot by Cover One, one of the best values out there in all of Bills content creation. So we really appreciate you all being here and being proud members of our Slack channel and other things that we have going on at Cover One. And make sure you slash and mash the like button to help us continue to bring you great content all throughout the season. And as we kind of go into it now, we'll bring cuts up again a little bit later. And we'll also kind of think about after, I'll leave a 5 or 10 minute segment to kind of, Mike, tell me your final idea of your 53, as this will be the last time we talk. And then we'll kind of review it next week live on the show. But I do want to, kind of look through kind of some of the new numbers that we saw from the preseason last week. Now, one narrative we talked about last week, and I do want to put to bed here, and I know you're a fan of this one, the Case Keenum narrative. 16 for 18 for 192 and a touchdown. Looked mightily better with the real offensive line with this revamped Cody Ford. So I think that was put to bed. Matt Barkley still a solid 7 for 8. That's what you're looking for from a third string quarterback. I mean, he is just number 2. No. Is he a number 3? Yeah. Is he a guy holding the clipboard to take Davis Webb's job? Yes. He's going to be the perfect friend of Josh Allen. Another set of eyes in the locker room and on the sideline, and a really good backup emergency quarterback to if somehow he needs to be the number 2 on a week-to-week basis, he can be. But that's what you're going to get from Matt Barkley. He's certainly not a guy that can play at a high level much longer and much further on. So I do believe that he's going to be a perfect practice squad quarterback for the Bills and Matt Barkley. But Mike, I'm going to give you a chance to riff on Case Keenum narrative. Once again, 192 yards and a touchdown. Looked fairly flawless in what you're looking for from a veteran backup quarterback.
I mean, I don't want to brag, but I thought this was a pretty easy one last week, that fans were overreacting to one poor preseason performance when he was playing with backups against the Colts starters. Obviously, the results were going to be less than stellar when he had the Bills' 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th offensive linemen in front of him going up against quality NFL starters. And you know what? He had a couple bad throws against the Colts, and he deserves some of the criticism. But he has an NFL resume where he's guided a team to the playoffs, won a playoff game, and started for multiple different teams. At the worst, he's a quality backup, and I expected him to look much better this past game against Denver, and that's what he did. He came out, had a quality run game, time in the pocket to find his guys, and he lit up the Denver Broncos backups. Granted, he's playing with starters the first series, but even when it was backups versus backups, the Bills just completely dominated. Case Keenum showed he has the accuracy to step up if needed for a game or two and give the Bills a chance at winning football games if Josh Allen were to be out with an injury. Yeah, Case is not anything special. He's not going to be mobile in the pocket and making plays on the run like Josh Allen. But if you block for him and you give him a little bit of a run game, he'll be more than adequate as your backup quarterback. Appreciate the chat from Sophia, God's friend. Anyone that can smash that like button, we appreciate it. Appreciate the love on our show. But Kev, Case Keenum, as expected, he's going to be decent as the Bills' number 2.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, like I always say about any position on the roster, you can't have Stephon Diggs behind Stephon Diggs. And I'm always going to say that. You can't have it. Like, you're not going to have wide receiver 10 in the league, wide receiver 5 in the league behind your starting, behind Stephon Diggs. It's just not going to happen. You're going to have guys that are backups for a reason, or even look at Cody Ford, who, by all accounts, none of us really thought was very good, but even his own agent and his own team and his own thinks he has a chance to start in this league. So that has the same mindset across all the position groups. So anyone that has an opportunity to start generally finds it in free agency, at least to go compete to start. And so the Bills have to kind of pick and choose who they put behind their depth players like David Quisenberry. Like, that's a signing that is underrated. Like, that's just a good signing. At the time, we were like, he couldn't pass protect. Tannehill struggled, whatever the case may be. But look, he's competing for a starting spot with Spencer Brown, a guy that struggled at times on his rookie year. But both players are going to offer the Bills a new flexible versatility to do things that they weren't able to do last year. So those are what you're looking for in your bid. You're not looking for Josh Allen behind you. The league doesn't even have enough quarterbacks in the first place. Look, Mitchell Trubisky starting in the league right now. So there's not enough quarterbacks in the first place. Case Keenum's exactly who you're looking for behind. And none of you would have liked them taking a second or third round quarterback. So quite frankly, this is what you have. You have Case Keenum being the backup quarterback. And quite frankly, as good as any backup quarterback in the league. I think he's on many top 5 lists. Yes, he didn't play good against the starters of Indy. He needs to play a little bit better in that situation. However, did have an unfortunate bounce off of Crowder, had a couple of other situations, and was playing with his backups. He looked much better with Gabriel Davis and some of his starters. And even 2s on 2s, he looked much, much better. So that's, to me, I think the Bills are set at the guard spot specifically, but also at the quarterback spot. So I think both of those were proof that with the good offensive line, those guards and interior offensive line specifically, the quarterback played a lot better. So I think that was proof on evidence this week in the preseason, and I'm interested to see what happens this upcoming game. Does Case even play? I don't know. Is it all Matt Barkley? I'm not sure what they're going to do.
I'm fine with Case getting the start.
Yeah, either way,
with some backups. Not that maybe we'll save a little bit for later in the show what we want out of Friday, but I'd still want to see a lot of those backups get playing time.
Sure.
On Friday night. I don't want it to just be third stringers battling for spot 53. I would like to get Khalil Shakir and Kumaro and Hodgins some run to see if any of them have a chance at really stepping up even more. Obviously, Khalil Shakir and Hodgins have had a great preseason, but to continue that with maybe a starting opportunity this Friday night against Carolina.
Yeah, for sure. And as you kind of looked at keep continuing down the performance this past weekend against the Broncos, not a ton that I want to like super dive into just because, we are, a couple of days past it already, but Raheem Blackshear with another, as we go down to the running back room, another performance, is tops of the league in both receiving and rushing in the preseason right now. 58 yards rushing, 11.6 yards per carry, along of 25. Also added another really good kind of screen performance, 2 for 21 out of the backfield, and is tops of many lists. And even our own Eric Turner says that really him and Cam Lewis are the two that you might have to watch be claimed if you're looking at names across the Bills roster that have a shot at potentially making another roster. You have one right here that he does something really well. It's receive out of the backfield. So we'll see what the Bills have to do with him, and just kind of hope that he's able to be put on as the running back on the practice squad. But that's, he's definitely a guy that has shown to be what they're looking for. I think he would be on the roster if they didn't draft James Cook, Mike. So it's an interesting position to be in with Raheem Blackshear.
So every preseason you have a running back that steps up and catches the attention of the fan base, and fans clamor for them making the team, and rarely does that player ever make the team. You have guys like Antonio Williams, obviously. You can name them. The list goes on and on and on. Every team has a guy. I wouldn't categorize Raheem Blackshear as that guy that fans are looking at just because he's had a flashy preseason. I think he's been solid throughout camp. He's obviously stood out in these preseason games, but I think he's actually a rosterable NFL running back at this point. Not a starter, not anybody that would light it up. But you hit on him when the Bills brought him in as a UDFA. He has a lot of versatility, some special attributes. I definitely didn't want to go out on the limb and say any of that. But his ability to be a quality runner out of the backfield, he can catch passes, yards after catch. He has some nice maneuverability, ability to be a kick returner as well. He's versatile, and he can. Those attributes should get him on an NFL roster at some point. Hopefully, the Bills can sneak him onto the practice squad, because that would be somebody that you would love to develop and maybe keep as depth going forward. But to add further, all the Bills running backs on Saturday were incredible. The Bills offensive line had themselves a day. You start with Devin Singletary as the starter. He had a quality first series. Zack Moss, James Cook, they were both very solid. And Duke Johnson has been honestly very solid this camp so far as well. It's a numbers game. You can only keep 3, and that Tywan Jones is going to be the 4th for special teams. There's just not a path forward for Blackshear making this Bills roster. No fault of his own, but I don't think a lot of fans expected Zack Moss to have the ascension that he's had this training camp and this preseason. It's clear right now that the Bills do value Moss as their short yardage back, and that they're going all in on him. You could argue maybe this is to try to build up some trade bait, but he's a running back. There isn't going to be much of a market for him regardless. Most teams think they can claim someone off of waivers that'll be cut at the end of the preseason. So I think this is legitimate. I really do believe the Bills are going to give Zack Moss some run during the regular season now. And he might be the guy that gobbles up some touchdowns off the work of Allen driving down the field, off the work of James Cook, off the work of Devin Singletary, Stephon Diggs, and the rest of them. But I think it's pretty confident you're going to have a Singletary, Cook, Moss backfield going forward.
Yeah, an interesting point about him being a returner. That could be the difference of having him be a backup returner. I mean, if something happens, you do have that versatility. I mean, and music to my ears is a scenario like this, where you were getting an asset for Zack Moss and on a really looking good level, where maybe you get more than you ever thought that you'd get for him, as maybe his value is pretty high right now with showing what he's able to show. Is he still going to get much run with Cook? The role Cook is going to have in this offense, there's no way Cook doesn't have a big role in this offense. Singletary looks great. I just don't know that the Bills wouldn't cash right now on a high return for Zack Moss, especially in a week from now. And if he gets a lot of playing time, I think if he gets a lot of playing time or a good amount of playing time this week, I think that shows that there's potentially an audition there. And I think Zack Moss comes with a little bit more of a pedigree than like trade a normal running back. He's young. He's on a rookie deal. He's shown that he can be good. I do think that there's ability to trade him over many other scenarios, especially at the cost of a 4 to a 6.
I don't think it's likely. There's so many talented running backs throughout the NFL. Every team has guys that they cut that you can safely get to your practice squad. I don't think another team is going to give up anything better than a 6th, 7th round pick when they know there's going to be a bunch of quality running backs that are going to be on the cut line being waived that you could just claim instead of wasting an asset to try to acquire one. I love what Raheem Blackshear is doing. I would love if the Bills can keep him and have a spot on the practice squad. Like I said, his return ability, the different things he brings to the table are strong. But if you look at what the Bills are doing with their running back right now, running back room, it seems likely that Devin Singletary is going to get his 50% of the carries. He's going to get the majority of the carries. And then you have Cook as the receiving option, and Moss is going to be the short yardage guy. They all bring different things to the table. And if you trade Moss, does Raheem Blackshear fill that short yardage role? I would tend not to think that based on him being the same height but 15 pounds lighter. I truly believe if you're gonna get rid of Moss, you need a running back that's gonna bring what he brings to replace that. So, and I don't think that's who Blackshear is. So at that point, you don't even need the third running back that's going to be active on game day. You can just get rid of it. Like I think they're looking for 3 different defined roles, and they have 3 players that they believe are strong enough in those areas that are worth having active on game days. So that's why I don't believe Moss is a trade candidate, because if you trade Moss, then I think you still don't need Blackshear on your roster at this point.
Yeah, I think it comes down to what you think of Zack Moss's role and what you think, if that's actually important to this offense, to Ken Dorsey, to Josh Allen. Do you think that role, to me, his backup really, his real competitor was Antonio Williams. That was the backup kind of role that he was, almost how Williams found himself in Buffalo, to really because Zack Moss faltered. So Antonio Williams got kind of that little bit of a following there from that. And then they let him go. I don't think there was a real big reason to let Antonio Williams go, especially as a guy with a 90-man roster.
He was just a guy that was bottom of the depth chart, didn't have a.
But they wanted a UDFA like Blackshear more, like with that style.
So I do think Blackshear does have an interesting skill set. He brings you maybe a little bit more of what you would expect from James Cook if James Cook were to go down. So if an injury happened to James Cook, yeah, I could see Blackshear making the team, because Blackshear can do a lot of things that James Cook does on a lesser degree, potentially. But when it comes to Zack Moss, he's specifically in there to be a little bit more of that bruiser that you're not afraid to take a hit in between the tackles. And you look back to his career at Utah, Zack Moss was a prolific college running back in a power conference, and he was good at getting yards after contact and finding holes. And towards the end of his rookie season, he was becoming the Bills' favorite for RB1 in favor of Devin Singletary. Then he got the ankle injury, and let's be real, last year was a wash. He was not good last year at all. But all reports, in my own eyes, Eric Turner's own eyes, Greg Thompson, we've been at a bunch of the practices, the scrimmage, the preseason games, most of us. Moss has been giving opportunity after opportunity. He's been playing with the first team offense on numerous occasions, getting snaps with Josh Allen. Almost all the time that they're near the goal line, they're turning to him in situations that matter. To me, you got 3 different defined roles. If I was a fantasy owner, I wouldn't want any of the Bills running backs, to be honest with you, because depending on how things play out, I think there's a lot of different scenarios of how this will go. But I'm confident in the Bills' backfield. I don't think they have any good big name guys, but I think they have people that are going to fit solid roles in their offense.
Yeah, and I think this is a great point. Hey, he's fumbled on the goal line. He's fumbled when trying to get out of the goal line. I just don't think he's been very productive. They've given him first team snaps in previous seasons in the goal line, and the offense hasn't moved. I'm interested to see if that's changed.
Kevin, I get it, but that's also part of the past. So we have this debate all the time. How long do you hold on to that draft grade where you chose a player, and when do you move on from it? With Cody Ford, obviously a second-round pick, they tried to give him 3 years, and eventually it was just time to cut bait because they knew he wasn't going to be part of the roster anymore. And they move on. They get what they can for him. Right now, it doesn't appear that they have gotten to that point with Zack Moss. He's a third-round pick. You got 2 third-round running backs and a second-round running back on this roster. They all have resumes. We don't know how much that ankle truly hampered Moss last year. yes, he's been weak in the red zone at times. He had a bad fumble against San Fran Monday Night Football. We all remember that. But if they're continuing to go to him in these situations, they must have faith based on something that they're seeing in practice or a previous thought process going in. And yeah, there's legitimate reasons to have doubts. Can he be that guy? But they're going to give him every chance to be that person. And until he shows them that he can't, it looks like that's going to be the scenario. And it's important to know, like, we're all high on James Cook, and rightfully so. But out of the 3 running backs the Bills have on their roster right now, James Cook is the least proven of the 3 based on his college resume. Zack Moss was a big-name running back at a big-name school in the Pac-12. Devin Singletary did it at a much lower level in Conference USA at FAU. And James Cook, while on a national championship caliber squad, he was not the bell cow at Georgia. So given that, it would make sense that maybe the Bills are trying to spread the wealth out. And you're right. We'll see if Zack Moss can actually be successful in that role. But it definitely appears they're going to try to make that the case.
Oh, they're going to try.
Is there any reason to cut down on a few Josh Allen runs? I don't mind Josh running in the red zone, but they probably don't want him to do quarterback power at the 50-yard line 3 times a game just to get conversion on 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1 or 4th and 2, whatever the scenario may be.
Yeah. And I think here's a fun game to play, Mike, just for fun. If a team came to you today, if you had a roster crunch and said, I'll give you a 3rd-round pick for Devin Singletary, do you take it?
Yes.
Okay.
100%.
Right. Okay.
If a team came to me today and said, would you take a 5th-rounder for Zack Moss? I take that as well because I think I'll be able to do something with that pick. But that's just running back in the NFL right now. I like these high-round guys, but
if like Seattle came to you, who's going to run the ball, who's already just had a retirement, and they came to you and offered you a 3rd, how about anyone else? If someone came to you and gave you a 3rd for Devin Singletary, right? 1 year of technically 1 year of Devin Singletary, would you take that?
I'd take it right now. I'd take it right now because you know what I do then? Then I have James Cook, Zack Moss, and you know what? Maybe I have Raheem Blackshear make the roster then. There's different ways you can maneuver it, and I like Devin Singletary. I think he's a quality player, but when you look at the Bills running backs, I think obviously James Cook can catch the ball, but Zack Moss is a better receiving running back than he gets credit for. And right. Devin Singletary, while he gets receptions, that's probably the weakest part of his game overall, is finding a way to be more of a weapon in the passing game. But yeah, I'd take a 3rd-round pick in a second for any of them.
Yeah, speaking of 3rd-round picks, speaking of fantasy, Underdog Fantasy, get out there, give it a try. I know we talk about it every show. Use promo code COVER1 to match up to $100 on your first deposit. Fantasy season-long leagues on Underdog Fantasy. You don't need to have, if you're looking for another league, a practice league, a league to go supplement your other leagues. Season-long leagues. These aren't week-to-week leagues. These aren't, you lose if you pick the wrong salary cap levels. Go out there and give Underdog season-long leagues a try. Pretty fun. It's really cool. I've drafted a couple Cover One leagues. It's super fun to get in there and be active on that and get you ready for your drafts, as well as have a real season-long league to match your other things that you might have going on. So use promo code COVER1. They'll match up to $100 of real play with any deposit you make over there at Underdog using promo code COVER1. But really, Mike.
And Kevin, just be honest, we know that ain't happening. So that's just
what's that? My scenario? Yeah, no.
None of that is going to ever happen. So I'm not really too worried about it. It's nice to talk about. It's more of a value. Obviously, the value, 3rd-round pick for a guy that might not be on your roster next year, it makes sense. But
I just like to look at things like
it is a Super Bowl caliber team. You don't give up quality players when you're going for it all. So yeah, I understand that argument, and it's fun to talk about, but obviously not a realistic scenario.
No, I just think it's interesting when you hold the cards and teams know that, like, Bean's up for even Super Bowl level teams might not want to get a 5th-round pick for a depth level guard either. Like the league has an offensive line problem, even though we don't like Cody Ford. Clearly Arizona's thinking about starting the guy. They don't trade a 5th-round pick in season for a guy that you could, hopefully find someone on a waiver wire. They're thinking about him potentially having a job. So, like we say many times, one man's maybe trash is another man's treasure. Look at Poyer, look at other scenarios across the league where someone might see something in his film, in his old footage, in his college film, in his scouting report. You never really know. But he is open for business, especially this last week. He is open, and you don't count out. It's not as likely this year as others because we see those low-level trades, but don't count out a Bean trade to add somebody to the roster. Really don't count it out because he's done it every single year. If he hadn't done it every year, I would be like, maybe not.
And an interesting talking point from the press conference today was that he mentioned that there will probably be some restructures in the next week or so, which would typically indicate you're either going to have possibly an extension in the works with someone, or maybe there's a move brewing on the outside. So that's another thing that could be interesting too. I know Von Miller had 2 more Instagram stories today with OBJ in a Bills jersey. We've talked about this enough in recent weeks to not go in depth on it today, but interesting that Von Miller is still teasing fans with that. I still believe down the line, if we get to October,
I think it's a thing.
That there is some real smoke behind that. Not that that'll be what's happening anytime soon, but we've already given our opinions on that. But that is interesting to see if there is something in the works regarding an extension or anything else with the Bills going forward. But you never know. That's part of what makes Brandon Beane and the Bills organization so great. They are willing to do whatever is on the table that they believe makes them a better team. And if that means cutting a player that the fans like because they don't see the future with that player, they're willing to make the hard moves. That's what they did when they first came to Buffalo. They got rid of Tyrod after making the playoffs, and even before that, they cut ties with guys like Sammy Watkins, Darby, Marcel Darius. So this regime is not afraid of making difficult decisions, and that's part of the reason why a lot of the fan base has a ton of trust in them, because they have hit on a way higher mark than they've have fallen short on.
That's true. And what's interesting too is 1 week from today, they can sign a player like OBJ to put him right on IR. They don't even need to make a roster move, so their roster can be completely the same.
Could you imagine? Could you imagine if, like, I don't think it's going to happen like next week, but if that did happen, what are we going to be talking about? Like, you think about it, we've had a month of debating, is Isaiah Hodgins good enough to make this Bills roster, and will somebody else claim him? And then a day after final cuts, they sign OBJ, and he's going to IR to be a figure on your team for a playoff push.
But he's a free trade acquisition at the trade deadline without needing to give up an asset. I mean, that's exactly, you don't even need to make a roster move today. You can let it play itself out with the receiver room. Like, it's just so many advantages to Beans, and Bean loves advantages. He loves advantages. He plays chess all the time, and being able to sign him, we talked to 2 shows about it now, so there's really not a reason to touch too much about OBJ because we think what he could add to the roster. But the Von Miller teasing and stuff is getting to be more of a legitimate thing, to where the Bills would shut that down if they needed to. In terms of,
they would not have him continuing to do this if there wasn't some legitimate opportunity to maybe pursue him. And Andre Reed doing the same thing too. The Bills keep their legends in check most of the time now. There was a time when the Bills legends used to just say whatever they wanted, and you'd hear all this smoke and nothing came of it. But the Bills do a pretty good job of limiting the craziness from their former players compared to what we saw in the past. And not to talk about OBJ, but to talk about another guy that will be a topic of debate. I do want to address Isaiah Hodgins and just go through a small little update regarding him. He's been a topic on our show the last couple weeks, and there's been a lot in the fan base that wants him to make the roster. And you were seeing a lot of media on the Bills beat saying that, including him in their projections after his first preseason game against the Colts. But what I found really interesting in the last game, because I was 50-50. I had a tweet that during the Colts game that said I didn't think he was going to make it. Then I got myself convinced maybe he had a shot. I think the Broncos game showed it's an uphill battle for Hodgins to make this team, unless they somehow keep 7 wide receivers. And while I was maybe slightly 51-49 on him making it last week, I think I'm more now 25-75. I think the odds are stacked against him making it. And for this reason, going into the Broncos game, we thought if the Bills realistically thought Hodgins had a chance of making this team, that they would give him some run with either the starters or maybe some run with the backups immediate after the starters were pulled. That was not the case on what we saw on Saturday. The top three was exactly what we expected: Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Isaiah McKenzie. But then you're seeing Jamison Crowder making some plays. You're seeing Kumaro getting playing time with the twos before Hodgins is in the game, making plays. And obviously Khalil Shakir has been all over the place. He's the lock right now. The Bills are not going to cut Jamison Crowder. Even an example, that crossing play where him and McKenzie went right next to each other. Crowder made a nice play, might have had a chance at getting a touchdown. You have that experience, that depth that you really need if an injury happened or something else happened. The Bills have been trying to give Hodgins every opportunity by putting him on special teams to try to earn that spot. The results have not been good. Fans, sometimes we like to think that special teams players are easily replaceable, but there's a reason why they're not. Hodgins, there was a punt, the one punt opportunity the Bills had with Hawk in the game on Saturday. Hodgins let his guy torpedo past him, almost resulting in a block punt. It was ugly, quite frankly. And Hodgins is not performing at a level on special teams that can warrant keeping him on as an inactive every week. His one chance at making this team is as a 7th wide receiver right now. And that's it. And the Bills have not kept 7 wide receivers entering a season under Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane. The one time they had 7 wideouts was when they activated Marquez Stevenson late in the year. And that was because he brought something to the table on special teams. They were hoping he would be the returner. Isaiah Hodgins doesn't have that. He in special teams has been. It's tough. You got to be one of those guys that has that mentality. And right now he's struggling on special teams. And a lot of people, they'll say, well, he's a better wide receiver than Kumaro. Well, even when Kumaro's in the game with the backups, he might not be spectacular, but he still can make some plays. It's not like Kumaro doesn't know how to play wide receiver in the NFL. And in fact, he's had the opportunities at wideout. I like Hodgins, wish him the best. I just don't see it happening, Kevin.
Okay, that's fair enough. I was never a big, at least lately, Hodgins guy. I thought he showed some flashes. I always jump off the bandwagons of players who have shown to me that they're hurt or ineffective at times. In the Zack Moss camp, I'm not going to flip flop in my opinions. I believe I put him in that same camp of players that just don't jump off to me. He has some moments in preseason. So does Moss. They're the same player to me. Moss has just been a little bit better in regular season in his history, but I just don't see it. I saw a little bit this year that gave me some hope that he would make the roster, but after the special teams film I've watched, I mean, he's been bad. He's been missing lanes. He's been missing blocks. It's not been good. And someone like Jake Kumaro presents too much value to the team. Brandon Beane just went on today and confirmed it. Like, if you guys think Tywan Jones is getting cut, if Jake Kumaro are getting cut and not being on the week 1 roster, I don't know. Like, could they be those cuts that they need to put someone on IR? Possibly. But the Bills don't really have a true IR candidate. Maybe Marquez Stevenson. They want him stash again, so they're going to have to play a little bit of games. But other than that, I don't have a huge candidate right now that they would even need to do that for. And
Kev, the thing about it too is, like, if Isaiah Hodgins was just greatly outperforming the 3, the 4, the 5 wide receiver, well, then maybe you find a way to sneak him onto your roster. But he's been doing it against third stringers and the backups. And until he does it against a higher caliber level of player, he's going to need the special teams on his side. And special teams isn't for everyone. And unfortunately, a lot of careers end prematurely because a player with some talent just didn't have the special teams ability to keep himself in the league long enough. And you're going on, this is the 3rd year for Hodgins right now. Obviously, he has enough talent to have gotten to this point where he has a shot at making the Bills roster. And I hope he lands somewhere. I think he's good enough to play in the NFL. And I do think he might have a chance at landing somewhere and playing some games in the NFL. But when you're talking about him as the 7th wide receiver on the Bills, and that's his only role that you can justify him actually getting time during an NFL Sunday, I don't know how you make a Super Bowl roster in that scenario.
Right. And as you kind of cap off the offense from this game, we mentioned pretty much everybody except, Duke Johnson actually played pretty well himself. Just don't think there's a roster spot for him, but he was basically looking for an injury to make the team. We'll see if he's used as one of the vets on the practice squad. If someone like Blackshear does get claimed, Duke Johnson's their preferred first guy in a scenario. They would probably practice squad him in a scenario. If they were going to cut him early to give him a chance to find another roster, they would have already done so. So I do believe they have some hopes for Duke Johnson being one of the veterans with the new vet rules on the practice squad. So look out for that. Him and Blackshear right now are top candidates to be so. You look at the receiving room, play pretty well. Shakir still is like one of the tops in preseason in receiving, one of the best preseason performances so far. Boise State people love it. They said this is what we're talking about. He went grossly underdrafted. He's just a smooth route runner. Khalil Shakir, there's not a lot that needs to be said about him. Lock him up, actually give him a role in the offense, even more than I may have even thought. One of my favorite draft picks this year. I thought he was just standing out like a sore thumb. Him and Isaiah Likely, who's also having a great preseason, of course, down in Baltimore.
We loved him.
We're sticking out like sore thumbs, man. That's why I hated the trade up for Kaiir Elam. Only because that 4th round pick, there was some great talent. The Bills got one of the guys I wanted anyways, which I'm super happy about. But Isaiah Likely with into this as a final tight end in this roster would have been mighty nice. But that's why I wanted to hold on. That's why I love holding on those 4th round picks, because Bean nails them out of the park. But anyways, so Khalil Shakir is going to have a role in this offense. Going to be active, I believe, on game days and present you some challenges that teams just aren't going to be able to cover. McKenzie, Davis, Diggs, and then you putting Shakir into the game. There's just not enough DBs in the league to be able to do something with that. So Khalil Shakir is always going to be seeing teams 3rd, 4th, and 5th best corners. I just think that there's room for him to win in those situations very often in certain packages. We already mentioned Hodgins, obviously no need to mention how good Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs are and what they're able to do for the roster. But, Kumaro had a few plays. Obviously Blackshear's been good in the receiving game. You mentioned Crowder a little bit already. Tavon Austin was caught, but OJ Howard, here's a point that I was getting to here in the tight end room. I just don't see the path for him getting cut. He's going to be your 2nd tight end. He's played well. This is the 2nd tight end that Cromer has picked. This is the 2nd tight end that Dorsey signed off on. I just don't see any scenario where you're going to take a cap hit more than what he's making today, plus paying the next tight end that you need to have on your roster, $900K. Now you're talking about a team that's looking to make playoff moves. Even if he's close with Sweeney, you still put Howard for what he could do and his cap number. They've already designated him as tight end 2. They're not going to pay another $1.5 million to get rid of him to swap out with Sweeney. It's not going to happen at this stage. Like, someone would have to give us a draft pick for him, and why would someone do that? So right now, I would envision Howard being your tight end 2. And you saw in that crosser, that nice touchdown he had. That's what he's looking to do. That's what you're looking to have out of him. He's not going to be the tight end 1 you were hoping for back 4 years ago with Tampa Bay. This is what he is.
Dumb thought anyway, though. Yeah. Because he was a 1st round pick out of Alabama, like, his NFL career has shown that he's never going to be that.
He's a 1B.
Yeah, he's a solid backup. He's never going to be explosive or anything amazing, but I understand there's some weird narratives coming out of camp right now from some of the Bills beats as far as
the Howard one's weird.
Obviously, Knox is the number 1, and it's something that we always say in car sales: never oversell, underdeliver. And I feel like right now OJ Howard is a little bit of a product of that, where maybe some in the media, maybe some fans expected a ton from him coming out in camp in the preseason, and they're disappointed by the lack of production. But Howard is a solid blocker, and he'll get the occasional touchdown grab. He's not going to be anything dynamic, but you do have the ability to try out some 2 tight end formations with him on your roster. Tommy Sweeney is easy practice squad, in my opinion. I don't see him getting claimed, and if he does, good for him. The guy I'm actually a little bit encouraged by potentially in the future, if they can get him to stay in the practice squad, is Quinton Morris. He's had a good camp. He's had a strong preseason, but I don't think he's at the point where you can say he's going to knock off OJ Howard off the Bills roster. And I say this all the time, and I don't mean this to be mean or critical of any group of people, but a lot of times when you're talking about the media, there's a lot of groupthink. They all chat, they talk before and after the practices, they're on the sidelines together, and somebody has a thought, and then the next thing you know, they're all saying the same thing. And I feel like that's OJ Howard has been a circumstance where you hear people saying about stuff like Tommy Sweeney's flashing in practice. Yeah, he's had a few catches here and there, but there's nothing that Tommy Sweeney or Quinton Morris are doing during practice that is more significant than what OJ Howard has shown over the course of his career. And that's really what you're comparing right now. Does the potential of a Sweeney or a Morris, is that more deserving of earning a spot on this Bills roster than what OJ Howard has already shown he can do for this team? And until they have the ability to show that their potential is more than that, well, then they're going to be on the outside.
Sure. That's quite frankly true. Quinton Morris might have a bigger play because he's a good blocker. He's shown good in teams. He has some ability. Quinton Morris might be a player, one of the first guys up in situations, one of those COVID level players that you can bring up in situations. You get the 2 call-ups per game, and then they can play a certain amount. Quinton Morris is going to be a priority practice squatter to me. I think he's going to be someone they are holding their breath for. I don't believe there should be a claim there, but you never really know what other teams are thinking. So he's going to be someone that the Bills are really hoping that they can put on their practice squads. I do believe that they have some ideas for him if needed, or if another tight end gets hurt. And I mean, I think that's overall, the offense in general. I mean, the offensive line's pretty much worked itself out now with Greg Van Roten, Tommy Doyle, Greg Mance, Spencer Brown and David Quisenberry kind of as that 4 through 8 range. So I do believe that there's there. And then do they go Bobby Hart? What happens in that final spot here in the Bills offensive line? It's going to be interesting to see if Luke Tenuta, if they'd rather, have him kind of as an inactive game day guy as well, kind of developing, or if they go to, because quite frankly, Tommy Doyle took a little bit to get ready too. He's one of the best RAS players ever and just needed some time. And maybe they have the same plans with Luke Tenuta as well over someone like Bobby Hart, who they quite frankly feel like they can call up at any time. Because he's a vested vet who isn't going to need to really.
A lot of people think Bobby Hart has a path to this roster right now. With Cody Ford gone, Bobby Hart might make it.
Definitely has a path. I mean, he's got a path because Ike Butker's out. So his path really is against Luke Tenuta. Like, that's his path.
I give Bobby Hart the advantage right there.
Today?
So it's kind of wild. He's a guy that we never would have said heading into camp that he would be on this Bills roster. And now it's more likely than not, unless something crazy happens in this next week.
But he's still the 10th offensive lineman, so they'd want to have to keep 10. So
We'll see.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been talking about Greg Van Roten's a lock. I mean, he has been lower on the depth chart when it's been coming to this preseason action. We'll see how it all plays out. When it comes down to the last couple linemen, they could go a couple different directions.
Yeah, and Mike, we do want to have a mention of what we expect in this upcoming preseason game on Friday. And then lastly, we'll want to get your take on, we kind of talking about the 53-man, but I want your final opinion on some final names. We're going to do a make it or cut it segment to end the show here, a couple of minutes on that. But lastly, before we get into the make it or cut it section, I want you to tell me what you want to see from Friday. Are you just punting on that game like the Broncos just did? What are you doing with that game on Friday, or are you utilizing your 30 through 50 man on the roster?
I'm punting the game kind of like Denver did. I don't want anyone that you believe could play a significant role in this upcoming season for the Bills playing on Friday evening. I've seen what I needed to see through the first 2 games. Now, I'm okay with having some players that are going to see regular season action. Like I mentioned, like Crowder is falling low enough on the depth chart now where I want to see the immediate backups. I want to see Case Keenum, unless you plan on playing Barkley the whole way. I want to see Case Keenum in there. Backup offensive line. I want to see Crowder, Khalil Shakir, Kumaro get the start. Get Hodgins sometime in there on Friday. You already have rotation on the defensive line. Get the backups in there. I don't need to see anybody notable on the defensive line. Get the guys like Boogie out there, AJ, get them some live reps. And and just let the guys low on the depth chart duke it out, put some tape, try to win jobs across the league and show why they're deserving to be in the NFL. But beyond that, I don't need to see anybody of like I said, of significance out there to risk an injury and really play well in a meaningless game.
Yeah, and Silas, thank you for the super chat. We clearly have some interesting chats going on here today. Not sure if is that a knock on the Bengals? Are we saying? I don't know. I think there's a lot of banter going on in the chat room right now. So really appreciate you guys being active and keep that energy when we have our guests, because some of those guests do bring over some of their fans. The Jets one will be great, I promise. So do keep that energy when we get the crossover editions with the other teams' experts. So thanks again for chatting in there. So for us, it's a matter of, Mike, I like to always press it a little bit. Like, do I want to press it with teams that are players that'll actually have playing time this season? Not quite, which would mean Barkley all game, but I want to see as many as possible. I want to see I'm about at the 40-man cutoff. I would like to see from 40 to obviously 80, but that's kind of where I'm thinking right now. Like, I think keeping 40 players off is still plenty of players that aren't going to play, but I do want to see that bottom 10 versus the first 10 out, first 10 in versus first 10 out. Kind of like that if this was the NCAA tournament. I would want to see all those players on the bubble and a little bit more, and then all the players right there. I do think that there's some definite advantage to playing as many as you feel comfortable. Keep all your special team starter out, all of your offensive defensive starters, all your key contributors. I want to see the Hodgins, the Mosses. I want to see.
So you got it the right way. You got the right way. I'm selfishly saying Keenum and guys like Crowder and Khalil Shakir, because I want to see some of the guys that I could see.
I think Shakir plays. Plays.
The thought of Barkley playing an entire game,
I know,
is not really appealing to my eyes. Like, I love Matt Barkley, but like the thought of watching him play an entire football game is a little. At least
it's on the road.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm not paying for the tickets, so but I am paying in 3 hours of watching my television on a Friday night. But yeah, no, you're probably the right scenario. You want to minimize any risk of anything bad happening. So that's probably the smart football answer. I just couldn't get myself there.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, John. I really appreciate you chatting in here on the super chat. Always can count on you. And I agree. It is one of the best rosters, just up and down, that we've ever covered. It is tough to find some of these spots for these players. I do think you'll see more players claimed here than ever before, just due to the testament of how good they are. You have Elijah Griffin out there potentially pushing for a roster spot. You have just a couple, like there's just going to be a few spots that the Bills are holding their breath on. Maybe Quentin Morris is one of them, Raheem Blackshear, Cam Lewis. There's going to be some names out there that the Bills really are hoping that they could push through to the practice squad to be still key contributors to this. They might mean more to the Bills roster, but maybe not. There's teams out there with gaps and holes. Like the Bills rosters of Chan Gailey years of being like, hey, I'll take a chance on Cam Lewis. Guy looks good. I'll take a chance on Quentin Morris. I'll take a chance on Raheem Blackshear. There's nothing to lose for some of those teams. So the Bills are holding their breath on that actually happening. And thanks for the shout out. That means a lot, a ton to us for chatting in with us.
Good day today. To bring up Kevin Durant too. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the Kevin Durant shout out for sure. So as we kind of look through and think about who's going to be playing this weekend or this week, Friday, really, it's really interesting to me to think about like the rookies. I still think a lot of the rookies will play. I do think you'll see Keenum for a quarter and then Barkley for 3. I do think that's likely. Wouldn't be shocked at 4 full quarters from Barkley though. So I think that's kind of the path. And I just think the Bills getting Shakir reps might have value. And I think the injury risk or risk of real injury is pretty low for him. So I think that's going to be interesting. I think a lot of Duke Johnson, you're going to see a lot of Raheem Blackshear. And I want to see these guys. I want to see what these guys can do because it's going to be an interesting position for the Bills because a lot of the times that these guys are showing out to be claimed by another roster. So we'll see what the Bills do. Maybe that puts precedent on some more backups that the Bills will play that will make the roster due to that situation. Like, those 15 to 20 roster players who will come on and who are on the roster that can't show out and be on another team. So there is some games that the Bills could play with this game as well. So I think that my idea, no injuries. They've been pretty good to this point. They've been good under this regime in general. So that's why I'm not overly worried about the risk. They've been good under this regime in general. And I don't think they'll play anyone high enough risk to where I'm really nervous about watching this game. So I do want to see what the Bills are able to do, and all the backup offensive line. I do want to see all the twos there. I don't think you need to get nutty and only play threes on Friday. So I think that there's plenty to watch for, and I'm going to enjoy this game. I think it should be like a hybrid game 4 used to be last before these changes. I think you can still do some of that, but still sprinkle in some of the twos here and see something that's going on. And they got to keep that winning streak up, go to 11, because I want to see a Bills-Baltimore preseason game next year with multiple double-digit game winning streaks next season. So I think that that's my ultimate goal, Mike.
Why can't we pump up that's what the fans want to see.
So that means more Case Keenum for Mike. More Case Keenum for Mike in this specific game. And it could be interesting. I do think that the Bills do have the ability to play some twos because they quite frankly have a lot of good depth behind if something does happen to somebody. So I'm interested to see how they play this game on Friday, Mike. But I had a few final minutes to do keep them or cut them. And this is the final segment of the day.
I don't know any of these players that you're doing right now. So this is all random based on what Kevin has decided. So
that's the point. I don't want to give you a chance. I want you to give me the honest opinion on 5 players that are on the bubble that I think are in that 53 to, I think even Bean said today, like, I think I can't remember 57 or 58 exactly. There is 5 guys that do have a chance to make this roster, that he 5 and 5 one way or the other that could make this roster. So I want to potentially pick out 5 of them. You can't cut them all, Mike. So I want your honest opinion on these 5 keep them or cut them segment that we're going to do here. And first up is your friend Isaiah Hodgins. Keep him or cut him. What's the final not 25-75? What's the final consensus?
Cut him. He just doesn't bring enough from a special teams perspective. I love the progress he's made as a wide receiver, but ultimately this organization has shown they don't keep 7 wideouts coming out of heading into the regular season, and I can't see him making the cut here.
Okay. So with the 9 offensive linemen, Bobby Hart is currently the 10th, even after the moves today. Keep him or cut him for the 10th offensive lineman with Bobby Hart.
I don't like what I'm about to say. I'm going to say right now, keep him. I think he has played solid this preseason. The moving Cody Ford might have just opened up a spot for Bobby Hart to make the team. I'm not going to say I'm going to be confident in the decision, but I'd say right now he does have a path. It's not a lock by any.
So I have
thing in the imagination, but I would say keep him right now.
I have 2 cuts there, so we'll continue on to the keep 'em or cut 'em segment of the show, which to me is always one of the funnest, especially when Mike has to go off the cuff on him a little bit. So that's what Mike's got to keep in a cut so far as we go into the final couple players.
I'm not saying I want Bobby Hart, but I think they might. So I don't know.
Okay, all right, that's fine. Mike Love,
cut him. I like Mike Love, but I don't see a spot for him on this roster.
Okay, so Mike, I am also cutting Mike Love. I do think Shaq Lawson played well. We didn't get too much into the defensive line, but I do think Shaq Lawson played
on Saturday.
He solidified himself as being a good 5th defensive end.
Yeah, I didn't really have any doubt from the beginning of the preseason that he was going to make the team, but he ended any questions that there could have been.
Yeah, with this cut him and keep him is really Mike Love, Shaq Lawson. So you have Shaq Lawson.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Okay, yeah. I think that's the right decision. I think that's the right decision there. Here's a good one, Mike. Player 4, Balen Spector. Keep him or cut him. What do you got here?
It's a tough one. That's one of those 50-50s. You invested draft capital in him. He was impressive in his preseason debut, but right now he's still struggling quite a bit again in coverage. I don't think he's somebody that you could actually have faith in if needing an opportunity to play in NFL live action. I'd say cut him. I want him to be on the practice squad. I hope he can find a way to the Bills practice squad, but right now I'd say cut him.
I got keeping him. So I got the Bills keeping him. I do believe with the Andre Smith suspension, I do believe the Bills keep Balen Spector at least for now and give him some time to develop, potentially as an inactive. Potentially they might need to use him, but I do think that they like a lot out of his run stopping. Does need some help in pass. But I think that they ultimately think that they can develop him, and we'll see what he's able to do on special teams will be the make or break. But right now, I got the Bills keeping him. So I have 3 cuts and 1 keep. You have 3 cuts and 1 keep. You keeping Bobby Hart. Ugh. Man, Mike, you're killing me.
I didn't say I was proud of myself.
I know. I'm going to the bank with Balen Spector. I'm feeling a little bit better about my keep. But lastly, a guy that we may agree on here. Well, maybe not. The final one for keep him or cut him, Cam Lewis.
I knew you were going to say him too. And it's hard for me not to be biased when it comes to Cam Lewis because we're both UB Bulls fans and we love that he's had a great career locally and then made it to the Bills. But my thought process on Cam goes beyond what he did in college. I truly think Cam has really developed into a player you can trust if needed. I'll say keep Cam. I do think he is deserving of being on this roster. And the fact that they gave him some run at safety last game, I think they're trying to see what he can do at any given situation, any spot that they put him at. So I'm not saying it's going to play out the way I just said it because I haven't gone through the entire 53 and made those hard decisions yet. But I'd like to see Cam Lewis find a way onto this roster.
The Bills talk highly of him. They can play multiple positions. They gave him some run even when Nick McLeod came back. I do believe the Bills have an interest in Cam Lewis's ability on teams, his ability to blitz. He's a good run blitzer. He played well against the Chiefs and in the time that he had to play. I think this is exactly who you're looking for as a depth cornerback who's been in the system, who's developed under them. The Bills always speak super highly of Cam Lewis. I have the Bills keeping him right now, especially if there's no veteran cornerback to be added. I think that's the benefit of Cam Lewis, 25 years old. He's not 30. I do believe he still has time to go, and I think the Bills will keep him as of right now. If Trey's healthy, ready to go, ready to play, ready to go week 1, that might be to the detriment of Cam Lewis, actually. But I do believe he is on the roster right now, and he's what they do with final player.
And what they do with Trey is going to have a huge impact because if you go on the PUP list to start the season, that's 4 more weeks that you have one of these guys on the Bills roster.
Cam Lewis is on the roster.
So it'll be interesting. And I pray to God I don't live to regret saying what I just said about Bobby Hart. So
you only kept Hart, huh? Out of that list?
No, I kept Hart and Cam Lewis. You kept Cam. Okay. I don't.
Okay, you're keeping Cam. So we agree, Mike, on Cam Lewis. So there you have it on some of the borderline route. We don't need to go and do 53, but I figured just to do the quick 5 segment that I had jotted down. Mike, anyone to add on the cut him or keep him, or is that pretty good?
I think that's a pretty good 5 to talk about right now. A lot of fans are going to want to keep Raheem Blackshear, but I think you and we both realistically know that's just not going to happen. Hodgins is a good one. Bobby Hart's a good one. Balen Spector, that the 5 you named are probably the 5 I'm thinking off the top of my head when you're talking about what spots are going to be up for battle.
What's really interesting,
Cody Ford would have been too, but
he would have been. But what's really interesting about him too, the defensive line position is Mike Love's there. Also, Mike Love's played well. Is Brandon Bryant and Eli Ankou. Those are 2 guys in the interior now. Those are 2 guys they like and have played good in stretches. So the Bills are hoping they can get one of those on the practice squad because they both could make a roster. It's not crazy to think they keep one of those 2. Those would be the only other names that I have for cut them or keep them. But, watch out for Eli Ankou or Brandon Bryant. They both do things well that this regime loves. So those are 2 players that could make the final roster. Because those are 2 names that are probably in that 59 that being referenced here today.
And if you're talking about players that like if you cut, will they be claimed by other teams? Raheem Blackshear would be one of those guys, but you can't let the current situation impact your decision with Blackshear. Hodgins, there's a chance someone might take a flyer on him, but I don't think that's a lock that a lot of people have been saying. I think there is the possibility you can sneak him onto your practice squad. Far from a lock either way. Cam Lewis, I feel like he would be a popular target for another team. He has NFL game tape. He's shown he's capable of, in that he can keep up when given the opportunity. I think Cam Lewis would be a guy that would probably be gone. The rest of the guys, Bobby Hart, you can probably sneak him onto your practice squad. So maybe that's a reason to cut him, is because you can stash him most likely. And even if somebody else claims him, how long is he going to be gone for? You've seen the Bills move him multiple times. So does the ability to get someone onto your practice squad safely, does that play an impact with some of these cuts? It might.
And one of the best ways for Isaac, I mean, I think Shakir and Kumaro are pretty close to locks or locks. But what might get him on the roster though will be he'd have to beat out like Jamison Crowder. That's really the Hodgins path to the roster, and I don't know that he's going to be able to do so. With that being said, so definitely some of those names are priority practice squad guys. You can only keep a certain amount of vets when you have to already give one to Matt Barkley. You can only keep a certain amount of those vet guys, though. So you can't keep all the Brandon Bryants, Eli Ankus, Matt Barkley, Duke Johnsons. You can only pick a select number of those because everyone else has to be Kingsley Jonathans, Prince Emilies, CJ Brewers, Quentin Morrises of the world. So those are the more likely practice squad with a few vets mixed in there. And I do believe Cam Lewis would be claimed. So I think the Bills is ultimately what put him on as my 53rd man on the roster. Would be that I think that he would be one of very few that would get claimed. Him, I think Spector would have a little bit of a shot, and I think Blackshear would have a little bit of a shot. But I don't really see many other players being claimed. And then Neil Pau is a guy I want on my practice squad as well. We didn't really.
I think Spector is probably safe for the practice squad. Teams had 6 full rounds to draft him. Bills got him in the 7th round. If someone else wanted,
maybe someone didn't have a 6th or a 7th, and they have a roster spot eligible.
That's fair, but I don't think Spector has shown enough to warrant being on most 53-man rosters. I think most teams would look at him as a practice squad type player. And if the Bills are going to put him on their practice squad, I don't see another team elevating him to a higher level.
And Bean's pretty honest. There's no reason he couldn't, because no one would know who those 53 are. It's not like Balin Spector would know if he's on that 53 or not. He absolutely could. Being very honest. Listen to him with Pat McAfee. Listen to him on Adam Shine. He's a really honest interview. He's more so than a lot of other than the head coach. And others like I watch other sports teams where their GM and head coach just don't give you anything. And he's definitely really honest. I do think he could say that. And especially with the roster he's built, no one would really bat an eye if Brandon Beane said, I know my 53. In fact, it's a week away. I bet you he does, Mike. Could there be a final play here?
McDermott never would.
Yeah, correct. Bean would say, I know what my 53 is. Sean might disagree. That would be something he would definitely
While
say.
Both being completely in unison behind the scenes. They would say the exact opposite. And,
right.
The headline would be, there's angst in Buffalo between management, and then behind closed doors, they see eye to eye on everything. So.
Right. Well, Mike, really action-packed 90 minutes here from the Going Deep podcast. We do have the film, Cover One Film Room coming up now with Eric Turner and company. Make sure you tune into that because we really appreciate you guys sticking with us for 90 minutes because we're going to be bringing you a really fun cut show next week. We talk about the roster, break down the 53-man roster, talk a little bit about the game after the 53 roster will be first, and we'll talk about whatever we saw from the game. But at that point, it won't be too much because the cuts will kind of speak for themselves on what we saw from the game. So we'll talk about the game. We'll talk about what we're looking forward to in the upcoming season opener here in 2 weeks, Mike, as well as the final roster. We'll break it down. We'll be talking about what we think could happen with the practice squad and a couple of other cool stories that we'll have for you coming live next week here on Going Deep Podcast on the Cover One Podcast Network. Please smash the like button. But from Kevin and Mike, we really appreciate it as we're coming close to kick off in the NFL here in just over 2 weeks. We'll catch you guys next week, 7 p.m. right here. Tune into the Cover One Film Room coming up next right now on the Cover One Podcast.
Josh Allen. Looking deep, going deep.
To me, talking about the Bills, what else would you rather be doing?
We're hoping to add a new dimension to the Cover One network.
Slings it deep downfield, and it's caught inside the 20.
Right now, I just want to talk about this championship level. I've never had a championship caliber team to talk about.
I want to focus more on the storylines each week. What are the big stories going on with the Bills? What are thoughts, commentary? How do these things impact Buffalo?
Deep drop. Deep throw. And it is hauled in for the touchdown.
Allen deep to the end zone and caught for a touchdown.
Play action.